Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 28, Text 32. Translation. A yogi should similarly meditate on the most benevolent smile of Lord Sri Hari, a smile which, for all those who bow to him, dries away the ocean of tears caused by intense grief. The yogi should also meditate on the Lord's arched eyebrows, which are manifested by his internal potency, in order to charm the sex god for the good of the sages. Purport. The entire universe is full of miseries, and therefore the inhabitants of this material universe are always shedding tears out of intense grief. There is a great ocean of water made from such tears, but for one who surrenders unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the ocean of tears is at once dried up. One need only see the charming smile of the Supreme Lord. In other words, the bereavement of material existence immediately subsides when one sees the charming smile of the Lord. It is stated in this verse that the charming eyebrows of the Lord are so fascinating that they cause one to forget the charms of sense attraction. The conditioned souls are shackled to material existence because they are captivated by the charms of sense gratification, especially sex life. The sex god is called Makaradvaja. The charming brows of the Supreme Personality of Godhead protect the sages and devotees from being charmed by material lust and sex attraction. Jamunacharya, a great acharya, said that ever since he had seen the charming pastimes of the Lord, the charms of sex life had become abominable for him, and the mere thought of sex enjoyment would cause him to spit and turn his face. Thus, if anyone wants to be aloof from sex attraction, he must see the charming smile and fascinating eyebrows of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Hasam harer avanatakila lokativra shokashu sagara vishoshana machudaram sammohanaya rachitam nijamaya yasya brumandalam munikrite makaradvajasya. A yogi should similarly meditate on the most benevolent smile of Lord Sri Hari, a smile which, for all those who bow to him, dries away the ocean of tears caused by intense grief. The yogi should also meditate on the Lord's arched eyebrows, which are manifested by his internal potency, in order to charm the sex god for the good of the sages. So as far as we always see, Krishna, if we can see him, always has wonderful smiles upon his lotus face. We have never seen Krishna without a very beautiful smile, except in unbona fide pictures which are not very satisfactory, where somebody speculated and may have come up with the idea that Krishna sometimes doesn't smile. Krishna is always smiling, even when he's engaged in killing big demons. He's smiling because that's fun. It is a blissful activity. Krishna always has a very good time, whatever he's doing, because he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, full in all opulences, and especially blissful. Therefore, whatever he does, at whatever time, whatever place, under whatever circumstances, it's blissful. Now, unfortunately, that is not true as far as we are concerned. Generally, whatever we do, it brings some miserable condition, somehow or another. As far as I've ever seen. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. In this material world, it doesn't seem like a place where you actually become satisfied. Now, of course, somebody may have some other idea, I'm sure. But we find, practically speaking, that in this material world, it seems to be a place of suffering. Now, we could have learned that by just listening to Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, who proclaimed it as such, Dukkhalayam, Ashashvatam, temporary place full of suffering. But since we conditioned souls don't accept things that we hear, due to being thick-headed and less intelligent, we have to experience it on our own. And when we are given the opportunity to engage ourselves in this material existence, we march forward with great enthusiasm, ready to conquer the material world and enjoy and become the supreme controllers and enjoyers of the material nature, and we're very happy. Unfortunately, whenever we try in this way, we never succeed. We always find that the material nature has other plans. Our plan is to enjoy. The material nature's plan is that whatever your karma is, that's what you'll get. So sometimes some small amount of enjoyment comes. Sometimes a good dose of misery comes. These things, happiness and distress, are coming and going, like the appearance of the winter season, followed by the spring, followed by the summer, followed by the fall. This continuous change is bringing about the appearances of happiness and distress. Matra spashas dukkantaya. It is actually due to the touch of the material energy, which creates this happiness and distress, as if it was an automatic occurrence within this material world. And nobody really has control over these things. Sukhamanjikam daicha deha yogena dehinam. Sarvacha lavyate daivad. Yatha dukkam ayatnataha. Narada Muni also says the same thing. Kalabhyate dukkavad. The living entity, Gambhira Sarva, Gambhira Kala, Gambhira Ramasa, comes by the cause of time. One will become engaged in happiness. One will become engaged in distressful circumstances simply by time alone. By time alone, happiness comes, and in due course of time, distress comes. In the same way that one cannot avoid a distressful circumstance if he's meant to receive it, similarly, one also receives his happiness in due course of time, automatically. The workings of this material nature are very wonderful. The material energy is all-encompassing powerful because it's Krishna's energy. Daivihesha gunamai mama maya durataya. It's my potency. It's my energy. Therefore, to overcome this material energy is very, very difficult, if not impossible. A living entity who is in this material world, wrapped up in a particular material body, is very much conditioned by his activities that have been taking place through various forms of life since time immemorial. Therefore, the living entity is wrapped up tightly in the bondage of this happiness and distress which comes to him due to his previous actions. Icha dvesha samudraina dvandva mohena bharata. That sarva bhutani sammoham sargayante paranta. Icha dvesha. The happiness, Icha means desire, and dvesha means aversion or hatred. Everybody in this world is born into this delusion. Sarva bhutani sammoham sargayante paranta. Everybody takes his birth, all the living entities, within delusion because of being overwhelmed by this energy of desire and hatred. I want this, I don't want that. I like this, I hate that. Love and hatred. These are both on the same coin, two sides of the same coin of material attachment. The living entity, being bewildered by the material nature, doesn't understand that all these activities are taking place by nature, but he does understand that some things he likes and some things he hates. You don't have to teach anybody how to love or hate. In our Gurukul, we have no such department of knowledge. How to love and how to hate. Of course, to teach others how to see all living entities equally and thus develop compassion for them is definitely our department of knowledge. But as far as material love, because that is spiritual love, as far as material love goes, and material hatred, that's automatic. You don't have to teach anybody. You don't have to teach the young boys and young girls how to fall in love. And you don't teach them how to hate either, because it is coming from the natural inclination within the heart. That natural inclination is part of the spiritual potency, as the spirit soul has the possibility to either be a lover or hater of Krishna. Sometimes this word, hatred, has brought up a big controversy. Not so big a controversy, but there has been a big controversy about that word, hatred. Because dvesha can also refer to enmity or aversion. Itcha dvesha are opposites, so one could say desire and aversion. But aversion doesn't really describe enough what actually is going on. We have desire. Practically there's a lust to enjoy in this material world. We want this material nature. We want to enjoy. We have a lust, a dripping, drooling lust. Yeah? Just like here in this verse we hear about Makara Dvaja, the god of lust, material sense enjoyment, sex attraction. So he's on one side. Everybody drooling with lust to enjoy this material nature. And on the other side, there is the hatred of things. The opposite number of so much desire for something is hatred. Throw it away, push it away, kill it, destroy it, burn it, smash it, crack it to pieces, bury it. As much passion as one puts in to trying to get something for his enjoyment, that same amount of passion he can put into his hatred. And that's really the opposite. That explains the loving attitude of the devotee. Some devotees are mad after Krishna. They are running everywhere screaming, Krishna, Krishna, where are you? And some demons are mad after hating Krishna. In the same way. That is the actual duality on both ends of the spectrum. The pure lovers of the Lord and the pure haters of the Lord. There are big, big asuras who hate Krishna so much. Krishna says, Mudho, Janmani, Janmani, Mama Prapyaiva Konteya. Again and again, I put them in demoniac births. I push them downwards. Why? Because they want to forget me. Therefore, I allow them to forget me. Krishna allows the living entity to forget him in order that he may be satisfied. How merciful is Krishna that he allows the living entity to forget him, if you want. Of course, before the living entity comes to that intense decision that I want to forget Krishna, Krishna reminds him in different ways, my dear living entity, wouldn't you rather surrender? Don't you think you may get into trouble? Often we find before we perform activities which may be not very Krishna conscious, within the heart we hear the message loud and clear. Sir, don't you think this is wrong? Don't you think what you're doing is not correct? Perhaps you should try surrendering. And then the mind says, no! No surrender. Now, I'm the enjoyer. Yeah. All right, I've given enough service to everybody else. Now I want my share too. What about me? Everybody else is getting something. What about me? This is one of the problems in the material world. When one sees another engaged in enjoyment, he thinks, what about me? Why I don't get that too? That caused the downfall of Sobari Muni, who was meditating under the water and was extremely powerful. But because he saw fishes engaged in enjoying in sex acts, so he thought, isn't that interesting? What about me? Why don't I do that too? Whereupon he fell down from his mystic practice and got married to many young ladies. And enjoyed householder life in a very extraordinary fashion. So, we find that this tendency is there. It's enviousness. Enviousness means, look at that, I want that too. But the hatred enters into it because it means rebellion against Krishna. Rebellion. Krishna has everything. And we are envious of that. Why we don't get. Why he only takes. We think like that. Foolish. Because when Krishna is enjoying, he gives everything to his devotees. Just see, in this verse and the previous verse, here we can just read the previous verse. The yogi should contemplate with full devotion the compassionate glances frequently cast by the Lord's eyes, for they soothe the most fearful threefold agonies of his devotees. His glances, accompanied by loving smiles, are full of abundant grace. So long as one is in the material body, he's going to suffer various forms, as Prabhupada so aptly puts it, agonies. It's not like you're going to be happy and blissful in this body all along. This body's growing old, it's getting more rotten. Sometimes it gets full of these little bugs who enter into it and make all kinds of nasty things happen. And what can you do? That's life. If it's not a bug that comes in from the water, it's the radioactivity which falls from the sky. How do you avoid the suffering of the material nature? You cannot. It finds out you. You don't want it, but it just finds you out. You're walking in the rain, thinking everything's fine. Little do you know, you're soaking up that strontium. Everybody's thinking, this whole material world is meant for my enjoyment. But actually, factually, the material nature works against us again and again to cause us suffering. I think people are starting to wake up about this. People just previously had quite some bit of complacency. They thought, we'll get it together, don't worry. Nowadays, it is my personal opinion and the opinion of some others who have been engaged in preaching too, that complacency is gone, and there's a great, great deal of frustration in the air. Because they realize it's out of control. They've seen that, this thing with the radioactivity falling from the sky. They saw it's out of control. And their sense of safety, security, and complacency is not there anymore. You can see it in the eyes. There's a fear. Some trouble is there. Oh, what might happen? They're beginning to realize, hey, this material world's a dangerous place after all. Maybe it doesn't all end very nicely. Maybe it doesn't end happily forever after. Maybe it does end in a big chaotic disaster, which is in the back of everybody's minds anyway, which is covered over by all these sugar plums and dancing fairies of the material network of illusion. That fear in the back of the mind, fear of destruction, fear of death. that's always there, nagging the conditioned soul. Great fears like this. He will be wiped out by the material nature because he has experience. It happened last lifetime, it happened the lifetime before that, and it happened the lifetime before that too, and before that too, and in fact every lifetime it happens. At the end, he's wiped out by the material nature. And therefore, the living entity develops a fearful attitude. He's no longer always so confident that yes, I will get it together, everything will be perfect, everything will be fine. He tells himself that, but as soon as there's something else which comes, immediately he's full of fear, because that experience he has had in previous lifetimes comes forward immediately. And he realizes, I'd better watch out. Here it comes again. Just like a man who's been in a war. Just like in America, you'll find so many veterans of Vietnam. And they're all piles of stories. That if somebody even pops a paper bag with air, blow the paper bag with air and go pop, they freak out completely. They jump on the floor, they doesn't care what they smash to pieces, or they grab for their rifle, wherever it is, they can't find their rifle, they start freaking out. Because of that burned in experience. They can't forget it ever, no matter what happens. And sometimes they're always contemplating this to such a degree that sometimes they just go crazy, get a gun and just starting shooting people madly. Because they're all the time contemplating this fearful situation in the back of their mind. Like sometimes the cars go bang. Sometimes some kids throw some firecrackers. All kinds of bangs are there. Thunder comes in the clouds. They think it's bombs. They go into a state of insanity. Just get guns and start shooting everybody, even their family. They don't know anything anymore. So there's a very good example of how you become conditioned. And people don't understand this. How a man becomes deeply, deeply conditioned. So much conditioned that the slightest reminder of that which caused that fearful condition in the past brings him back into the same kind of understanding again. And he can't control it. Deep fear. Therefore, so many people do things which are strange and which we can't understand. Because they're conditioned, not only from this life, although this life's conditioning is very powerful. Factually speaking, that conditioning has been building up life after life after life after life after life. And therefore, it's no wonder that people are sensitive to certain things. Some people are extremely sensitive, let's say, to a knife. If they even think of a knife, they get cringy all over. They can't even, it's just like horror. They just like start cringing. You know what cringing is? What's the Swedish word, cringing? Like, ooh. You don't know? Everybody's speculating. That's another thing we do life after life. We speculate. We have no idea, but we just start speculating. Anyway, it just causes one to withdraw in great fear, and he tenses up like anything, and this feeling comes over him. Yeah? Don't you have anything that you really can't stand? Everybody has his own little something. Yeah? Some people, if a spider lands on their arm, they just, ooh, that's the feeling. That's what we're talking about. Yeah. Everything. Everybody has something like that. And even he doesn't understand. There are things which just make him so full of fear. As soon as he even hears about them, he becomes full of fear. And other persons, they don't have any problem at all. Some persons, they even swallow knives. And some persons, if they even think of a person swallowing knives, they're ready to jump off the roof. Yeah. Some persons, they can go up on skyscraper buildings and look down as the building's being built. They walk on the steel. They can look up from like something which is, hundreds and hundreds of stories or feet in the air. It's just so high. You look down, people are like little ants. And they don't care. Other persons, you put them on top of this table and they're shaking. These are experiences which come to us. Even we don't want them. We're carrying with us all of these past experiences, conditionings. And on top of that, the material nature is continuously delivering us agonizing conditions. In this present lifetime, we are suffering agonizing conditions. And therefore, what shelter is there? What shelter is there? There is, what are we going to do? Here we are, a victim of circumstances that have occurred in the past. Of course, those circumstances occurred because of our karma. But anyway, let's just say, for the sake of the discussion, we're a victim of circumstances. Here we are, going to be suffering in various ways. What shelter is there? Because you can't avoid it. So what to do? Krishna says that the glances of the Lord, accompanied by his loving smiles, are full of abundant grace and free one from the contaminated conditions of the miserable agonies of this material world. In other words, Krishna is the only one who can free us from these suffering conditions, from these miserable conditions. Krishna, he's the only one who can free us from the ocean of tears caused by the intense grief of this material world. An ocean of tears. Now that is a very, very interesting metaphor. An ocean of tears. Because people are crying so much in this material world. Generally you don't see it. They do it behind closed doors. Or in psychiatrist's office. Everybody goes into the psychiatrist's office, ends up at one point making an ocean of tears all over the place. Because when people reveal what they actually think inside, it's just misery. Therefore people don't reveal what's inside. And everybody puts out the front that's just fine, everything wonderful, everything great, no problem. How are you? I'm fine. And you? I'm fine. Everything's fine and it's fine, yes. Oh, that's fine that it's fine. But within, they're thinking in their own specific ways. And deep down, they're suffering, like anything. Why? Because they don't surrender to Krishna. Because Krishna, by looking at his beautiful smile, he relieves all that intense anxiety caused by this ocean of tears. Everybody has enough suffering condition. We don't need any more suffering conditions. But Krishna is there, ready to relieve us of all these suffering conditions if we simply surrender to him. Now we know it. We're devotees. We know this. We know perfectly well that we should surrender to Krishna. But why don't we do it? Because we keep holding on to the slim hope that it's just possible we can somehow conquer over this material problematic life by our own endeavor, our own effort, by our own good works. But actually one who surrenders to Krishna is generally one who realizes there's no hope unless one surrenders to Krishna. Now sometimes people say this means that you must be a material failure. Therefore only people who are material failures can join this movement. That means they're implying that you must be useless. Otherwise you cannot join this movement. Well, in one sense maybe that's true. You must be a somewhat material failure. Because if you're a material success, then you don't surrender to Krishna. Janmaishraya Shuta Shibir Edamana Parakpuman. People don't surrender if they have a good birth, aristocratic family or good family, or they have opulences, riches, or they have good education, or they're very beautiful. Because these things become like an impediment, an obstacle, something which prevents them from surrendering because they get too much attached to these things. Therefore, one has to be a little frustrated with the material world, at least to some extent. One has to be frustrated. But that does not mean a failure. Not at all. I know in our case, we had no material problems. We were not frustrated materially. We had plenty of material, everything we needed. Not a single problem. But one big problem. Extremely bored. couldn't figure out what this whole world was supposed to be all about anyway. What is the use? So here we have, okay, nice house, car, good work, opulence, wonderful, great, big deal. It was not very satisfying. That requirement is also there. That's not exactly frustration. It is to a certain extent. But boredom is like the number one psychological problem in the United States of America. 75% of all people who go to the psychiatrist, at least according to this Science magazine, are going because of intense boredom, which has taken over as the number one psychological disease. Maybe not 75%. It took over as the number one psychological disease, intense boredom. Where the living entity finds that this material world, although we've arranged it so perfectly, everybody has his little cubicle where he can enjoy his sex life, and his dead animal on a roll, and his TV which rots his brain. He can have all these things, no problem. He can enjoy them. And everybody gets it too. Modern society, no problem to get these things. Even you can't make any money because you're completely worthless. They'll just give it to you. If you're totally useless, you can still have these things, no problem. You just go to the state, and the state says, okay, here you go, take it. But still, that is not the way of gaining satisfaction. One has to even look beyond that. Even if you're not suffering the agonies of the material existence, at least in the mind, there's always disturbing condition because it doesn't give anything positive in this material world. You don't get the positive result. Therefore, one has to learn the art of surrendering to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because that will bring satisfaction. That's the real satisfaction. That's the real life. That's the real way to gain that positive activity which actually brings one to a state of real, intense, mental, intellectual, and even physical satisfaction. That does not mean sense gratification. That means using the senses in the positive service of the Supreme Lord for the satisfaction of Lord Sri Hari, whose beautiful smiles are so protective that the arch of his eyebrow is bewildering Cupid. And by bewildering Cupid in that way, he is keeping him engaged so he can leave the sages alone, so they can go on their business of becoming Krishna conscious. Or put another way, if the sages meditate on those beautiful arched eyebrows, then they no longer are bewildered by the opulence of that Cupid who tries to capture them and take them away. Therefore, we always try to meditate on the beautiful form of the Lord, because that meditation will bring one to a very high platform. It is not something that will, of course, take place overnight, because, as we mentioned before, there's so much conditioning there. So much conditioning in previous lives of don't surrender to Krishna. Surrender to Maya. Don't surrender to Krishna. We've been rejecting Krishna continuously for a long time. In whatever form we might meet the Supreme, rejection has been there. After all, you can't avoid God completely. He's always there, always being presented in different ways. But one has many excuses to reject him. Like, oh, that's just Christianity. Or, oh, that's just some religiosity. Or, oh, that's just some sentimentality. Or, oh, anyway, it was just chance. Or, oh, this and that and the other thing. But factually, at one point, it gets right down to the point where you can't come up with excuses anymore, because you know too well. And at that point, one's faced with the stark reality of either surrender or give up right there. He knows he has to surrender to Krishna, but at that point he says, no, I just don't want to do it. We find that sometimes happens in the lives of devotees. They get right down to the point where they know everything. If you tell them, look, there's this, that philosophy, they go, yeah, I heard all about it. Why do they say like that? Because they're right down to the point in the heart where they say, I don't want to surrender. I want to enjoy. And they make that consciously, that choice. I don't want to surrender. It's a deep, deep choice. Of course, it can't last. Because to come to such a platform where one can be on such a deep level, one has to have made great advancement. But then, there's like one last chance to take shelter of the material energy before surrendering, and sometimes they dive for it. And say, last chance, getting old, look in the mirror, gray-haired, body falling apart, saying, oh, I'm getting to be an old bag, better enjoy quick before it's all finished. Therefore, sometimes disillusion captures the living entity. So, one has to be always, very carefully, very sincerely, pushing himself forward to surrender. It is something which requires to be rejuvenated continuously. Not just every now and then. Continuously, every day. Every day one has to rejuvenate, regenerate this desire to surrender to the Lord. Then he has a very strong possibility of actually maintaining his Krishna consciousness very nicely. And coming to the point where Krishna invites him into his pastimes, into his personal entourage, for accepting the position as one of the associates of the Lord. But once one comes to that position, there's no question of rejecting. Therefore, one has to be beyond all rejection, beyond all enviousness, nirmatsara, freed from enviousness. One has to be very humble. As Lord Chaitanya said, expecting no respect for oneself, ready to offer all respect to others, more tolerant than a tree, more humble than a blade of grass. This is the biggest problem, because in order to actually surrender to Krishna fully, one has to be very humble, to take total shelter of the Lord, without any other shelter. One has to know Krishna is my only protector. To be very meek and humble means that one actually knows that Krishna is everything. Krishna will protect me. And besides that, I'm very fallen soul. Krishna is the Lord, my master. I should render service to him. And to anyone else who's engaged in rendering service to him, I am the humble servant. One has to start thinking as humble servant. As soon as one starts thinking of himself as big master, in whatever degree, then he has so many troubles in spiritual life. Therefore, in a humble fashion, in a very dedicated fashion, one should continually engage himself in this process of surrender, and then he'll be very able to actually succeed in this process of surrender more and more. So, surrendering is the idea, and this devotional process is the method. So let us go on with it without any deviation. Is there any question? Fear of spiritual identity. That's for the Mayavadis' experience. They're very much afraid of being a person because they know in this material world, being a person is what causes trouble. Because persons are envious of persons, and that whenever you're a person, you end up talking, and whenever you talk, you end up saying something wrong to somebody, and somebody starts getting angry, or you get entangled. And therefore, one realizing that every problem comes from this social intercourse, as Queen Kunti said, Yanmitak Bhutanam Kalihi, all this problem comes from that. Therefore, they say, I'm not a person, there's no more social intercourse, forget it all. So fear of personal identity means anything that has to do with personal identity, it's going to give me trouble. So I have to give this up. That causes people to become impersonal and not deal with each other. Because they know as soon as I deal with somebody, boom, there's going to be problems. That's what the Mayavadi thinks. We don't think like that. Yeah, right. We shouldn't think like that. And honesty means you should go out and have a blast, right? Yes, you should know. Everybody should understand that yes, we have material desires. How else can you understand it? What do you think those things are anyway? I'm not finished. So, everybody has material desires. There's no doubt about it. And we all understand that. Everybody should understand that. If you don't, you're a fool. Every living being who's got a body must have, to some degree, some form of material desire. But that does not mean we act on it. We know this is desire born of the body or mind. And one should not become victimized by the desires born of the body or mind. One should see these things as separate from him. What are you confirming? That we don't or we do? Just like sneezing supposedly confirms something. Looking at somebody with one eye starts a fight. And everybody does that. Yes? I can't hear you. Well, the situation would be better. So long as one wants houses, then he will desire to have a better house. And he will work to get a better house. And he will feel better as soon as he moves in for a couple of days. Then the desire will come to get still a better house. Until he's got a huge mansion that stretches over 5 hectares of land. And he still won't be happy. That's the slow method. Get more, find out it doesn't work. Get even more, find out it doesn't work. Get even more, find out it doesn't. It's the slow method. You can take the slow method, that's okay. But that is not what we're trying to train up here in Krishna consciousness. We're trying to train up a higher understanding, where you know you don't have to go through this slow method of struggle. You know that I'm in a house in the material world. So long as it's not Krishna's house, it's not very nice. And then one is no longer very attracted to that particular house or a better house or any house. Then one starts to develop a little renunciation. We don't expect this immediately, but it naturally comes. That means you're on the slow train, local train, making stops at different houses. Well, anyway, at least you're on the train. But it's not like in Krishna consciousness we're ever going to have marvelous, wonderful houses. We may have marvelous, wonderful house, but then somehow or another, inexplainably, the Krishna consciousness disappears. We've seen it practically like a relationship. Those who make themselves a marvelous, wonderful house also make themselves big Maya. And those who keep themselves in the position which is not altogether that fantastic, but not bad. After all, what's a good house? Well, it's got walls, it's got windows, the window's shut, it's got a roof, it doesn't leak, the heat stays in, and there is heat, and there's a place to take a bath. What makes a house good or bad? And if your house is not so great, then put a new floor in. Put some curtains on the windows. Well, I don't know what makes a good house. In other words, instead of saying, I need another house or I need a better, then make the one you're in look reasonable. That's nice. Isn't it? I guess that note didn't go on very fertile ground. Yes, practically all situations are like that. Practically all situations are like that. It was funny. One astrologer friend of ours, he wrote in one letter, because he was arranging his whole life according to astrology, avoid this and watch out for that, and look out for this and watch out for that, it's this time and it's this day and that day and look out, kind of a thing. So he said, actually I've come to the conclusion that trying to avoid all these things is first of all impossible, and second of all, maybe you have to go through them in order to learn something. And it's not that the suffering conditions are bad. They're learning experiences. So even though you may be stuck in the middle of a suffering condition, if you use it as a learning condition, a learning situation, then that's very good. Then you've actually used it in the right way. And if you've used it as an opportunity to expand your material desires more, or to somehow become very disturbed because you're thinking things aren't going just the way you want them to, then it's not very useful. But it is also useful over long periods of time, because you can look back on it and see, well, I wanted it this way then, and I wanted it this way then, and I wanted it this way then, and I worked hard, and I worked hard, and I worked hard, but it didn't work. And then one realizes, yeah, it's probably never going to work. It didn't work then, and it didn't work then, and it didn't work then, and it seemed to work then, but then after a while it also didn't work, and then one surrenders. Generally in his old age, after a long life of struggle. But surrender comes. And for those who are more intelligent, they see, yes, this position which I'm now in is meant to make me surrender to Krishna more. So let me do it. Uh-oh. Thin ice. Thin ice. Look out. Now everything we're attracted to was, a scene of our past pastimes. Thin ice. The land of mental speculation. Thin ice. Maybe it's possible, I don't know. But maybe not. Then what? Who can say? That's a maybe, maybe not. Why, you want to... One great sage said that history is an account, generally false, of events which are generally not what they seem to be. In other words, history is generally false. That I know perfectly well. Just like we've seen in ISKCON, the past. And then we've seen some people construct histories. I'm not talking about the Lilamrita or anything like that. That is very good. But I'm talking about, when somebody wants to prove a point. Then he constructs a history of what happened in the past. And it's generally twisted somehow or another. It happened like this, and it happened like that, and it happened like that. Therefore this. They twist the history in order to prove a point. So in the material world, they're twisting histories in order to get to the point where they want you to believe a certain thing. Like in Japan, they still haven't gotten to the point of actually telling anybody what happened in World War II. They still can't get themselves to actually tell them. History's twisted everything, twisted backwards and forwards and up and down. And we certainly know the modern communistic countries are expert at twisting history as it's happening. Don't think it doesn't happen in the West. History's being twisted here in the West non-stop. What the newspaper prints has already twisted history. And then some historian comes along and takes the already twisted and twists it a little more into a historical account. So you've already got 2 or 3 twists by the time it makes the history book. And what actually happens, you don't know about. Now, of course, I know some scholars would probably say, yeah, that's true. And other scholars would say that's complete nonsense. Somebody would believe it, somebody would disbelieve it. That's also part of history. It's more or less your personal opinion. According to who you learn from, you have a different understanding of what happened. If you want to learn about what happened in, let's say, 40 years ago, World War II, well, if you learned it in Germany, it would be different from that which you learned in Israel. That's for sure. And then again, it would be different in Argentina than it would be, let's say, in America. The whole of South America has a different point of view on that. Everybody has a different point of view. And wherever we live, we think that is the point of view. This is the fact. And it's all different. Everybody has a different way of understanding. Now, not so different. After all, something happened at such and such a time. Okay, that's history. But the why and the how and it's all different. What do you think? Something like that? Pretty close. Why would we ever disagree that his Lord's not the Supreme Lord? If a Christian comes and speaks about God, why would we ever disagree that he wasn't speaking about God? We would never disagree. We would agree. Certainly we're talking about the same Supreme. We've been saying that all along. If you chant any bona fide name of God, but you have to chant the name of God. No. But we may make the hint that look at the results. Whether or not people are actually becoming lovers of God. That you have to see. That we have to see. Over time. We don't challenge anyway. We don't like to challenge. We don't come out and challenge unless challenged. There's only two classes of man that we challenge. We challenge atheists in whatever dress they may be, and we challenge Mayavadis who are also atheists in whatever dress they may be. Yeah? Therefore, we challenge voidists, we challenge philosophers who propound that, we challenge scientists. These are the persons we challenge. And generally, we don't challenge religionists, except when they're complete hypocrites. When Prabhupada used to challenge Christianity on one heavy point all the time. If God says, "Thou shalt not kill," why are you killing animals? On this point, he sticks. So challenge is not going on. We don't like to challenge others. It just makes sticky troubles. But Mayavadis we challenge. Atheists we challenge. We make war. There it's full out war. But I would think that others who are Christians or whatever, they should join in that challenge. They should like that. It's after all their philosophy too. Effective. It's effective. Because there's more contact with Krishna, therefore, and it comes quicker too, it's more effective to relieve the miseries of the material existence. Yes, that's a fact. And that is going on. And if there's any miserable condition, it's because we created it. Generally, the only misery that comes is the ones that come from inside when we create it, because we don't like this peaceful condition. We want to make troubles. People pick fights with each other all the time. Why? It's just too blissful. Gotta have a little suffering, you know. But this is Maya. That's the way Maya works. When it's too blissful, then everybody starts speculating. No, it's not like that. But we find that tendency is there. Yes? Well, you think killing an animal is not murder? Manslaughter, well, that's a complete mental speculation, concoction, twisting of the actual thing. Thou shalt not manslaughter. What, first degree or second degree? This is such a nonsense that they just change these words, and then that's the way it is. So you can preach like that. Yes? But you can kill anybody else, right? Too much. That's plenty food for preaching. That's plenty food for preaching. All right, Harikesha. At that time, you still don't have any particularly manifested nature. But when Lord Brahma starts to act, then the modes of nature start to act under his direction. He's factually working under the direction of Krishna, and the modes also work under the direction of Krishna. And Krishna arranges it so that the two work simultaneously to accomplish certain purposes. You never find at any point in time that the modes exist in separated form, because they don't exist separately. That is not a truth. They only existed in their so-called mixed form because that is the one energy of Krishna captured by ignorance. In the spiritual world, there is no ignorance, so there's only purified goodness. It is not that the mode of goodness in this world can ever exist in a purified state, because there is that nature which is there. Therefore, one has to transcend these modes completely. Then he can come to the purified goodness platform. That is beyond the material world completely. It is not like you just pick out the mode of goodness and extract it from that mixture. No. You transcend that whole arrangement. Then you can come to purified goodness. It is not that the super soul is contaminated by the material world. He only exists within the material world. His form only is acting in the material world because his function is to be along with the conditioned soul wherever he goes. So he is not contaminated by that, nor contaminated by goodness. Simply, he has no function. He's an avatar. Purusha avatar, which means he enters into this material world to perform a function which Krishna requires for the maintenance, creation, and annihilation of this whole existence. So he's in no way contaminated. His form is purely spiritual. However, it does not exist in the spiritual world. It is only meant for this material world, as is Mahavishnu, as is Garbhodakshai Vishnu, or as are the Guna avatars or the Leela avatars, although they may have some eternal form. For instance, Lord Shiva does have his eternal form in Kailash, which is between the material and spiritual worlds. Well, I think what I just said may take quite some long time to register. That is like the one of the most difficult points in the Sankhya philosophy, how these modes of nature do not exist in the pure state. And therefore, transcendence means beyond the whole condition of the ignorance, which is within ignorance. Yeah. Therefore, one should not try and manipulate those modes, even to the point of extracting something from them, but try to transcend them completely. See, the yogis or philosophers or gyanis, they try to separate. and try to come to some purity within all of this. But it's not possible, that purity. One can only get it by coming to the transcendental platform. That's why Krishna says, very difficult to overcome. If you are a devotee of Lord Shiva, certainly. Yes, but then they're known as Shaktas. Extremely doubt it. Why, you'd like to be? Extremely doubt it. Yes? You were thinking about illusion for a while. How long a while? How many millions of lifetimes? Yes, go ahead. What do you mean in between? When everything's unmanifested in the body of Mahavishnu? There are 4 states of consciousness: Sushupta, Svapna, Jagrata, and there's a 4th state which is technically called swoon. This state is the state which the living entities enter into during the time of the dissolutions when they are in the body of Vishnu. They are not in deep sleep or dreaming or conscious states, but in a swoon-like state. You know this word swoon? Like when you're fainting. This is a very bad example, but there's no such state that we presently understand in this material world. But if you're in a fainting condition, it is not exactly consciousness, it's not exactly sleeping, it's not exactly deep sleep, it's in a fuzzy kind of position which is like in a dream, not a dream state either. It's swoon, it's called. It's a 4th state. And the living entities generally stay within that state in the body of Mahavishnu. This is explained by Baladev Bhujabhushan in the Vedanta Sutras. That is not a state of illusion. Just like, for instance, there's also a big argument in the sutras between the different philosophers. What happens to the soul during deep sleep? That time when there's no longer any dreaming state. That time that must be there in everybody's sleep. And Baladev says from the sutras that at that time the soul takes rest in Brahman and gets rejuvenated for his next day's activities. Therefore he must have that sleep. Scientists have found if you don't have that sleep, you go crazy. No, illusion is the same. Not new. Just new universes come out. Illusion is Krishna's energy. It's Krishna's servant. Illusion is eternal, all right. But it's called in the eternal state, Yogamaya. The same illusion is there that makes Mother Yashoda think her boy, Krishna, is a little boy depending on her. Otherwise, if he doesn't eat, he dies. That's called Yogamaya. When that illusion is manifested in the material world, it's the same illusion. And it's again in that ignorance, that egg, that anda, that universe. Then that eternal quality becomes known as Mahamaya, or the great illusion of this material world. So illusion itself is eternal. And when it enters within that ignorance, it becomes known as Mahamaya, or the illusion which you are now talking about. All the spiritual energy is there. But when it goes through that gate, let's say, of the material coverings, it doesn't go through, of course. It is part and parcel of it, but just so that we get the picture in our mind. When it enters within that ignorant covering, then it takes on all these material qualities. unmanifested state. That's okay, but certainly you can think like that because it's not manifesting before you. But it's Krishna's energy, it's always there. But it may not act on you, therefore you think it's unmanifest. But it's still there. It's just Yogamaya. Just the energy of Krishna, just acting in different ways at different times. Energy of Krishna is all knowledgeable. It is always there, manifesting, but it just simply acts in different ways according to the necessity of the creation. When you speak of Brahman, you also speak of this as the all-encompassing basis of existence. All energy is there. But it can manifest in any variety of ways because it's full knowledge. That's the Chit Shakti potency. Wow! Any more urgent, pressing questions? After all, it's supposed to be the longest day of the year, isn't it? Poor materialists. It's raining and miserable. And they can't enjoy in the material world today. Oh, how terrible. Everything falling to pieces. And we devotees sit here and talk about the material cosmic manifestation in another way. So who's having more fun tonight? No more? All right. Harikesa.